What does a tomato have to do with Dungeons and Dragons?
Believe it or not, this tomato is going to help us explain one of the most used and most confusing parts of a character sheet: ability scores and skills.
What are ability scores in D&D anyway? They are the core stats that define each character's strengths, weaknesses, and capabilities. Just like you and me, everybody has strengths and everybody has weaknesses. These scores are just D&D's way of quantifying these unique abilities on the character sheet.
There are 6 different ability scores: 3 that describe a character's physical attributes, and 3 that describe a character's mental attributes, each with a simple name and a complex meaning. So, to make it easier to describe to a kid at your table, or to an adult who needs a refresher, we are going to use this tomato.
And now the Kids Table proudly presents describing the 6 D&D ability scores using a tomato, with special apologies to whoever it was that came up with this metaphor in the first place. Strength: how hard your body can throw a tomato. Dexterity: how well your body can dodge a tomato. Constitution: how well your body can handle eating a bad tomato. Intelligence: knowing that a tomato is a fruit, not a vegetable. Wisdom: knowing that you don't put a tomato in a fruit smoothie. Charisma: knowing how to sell a tomato-based fruit smoothie.
So where can we find these abilities on the character sheet? Come here and I'll show you. Each ability has both a score and a modifier. The score represents that character's physical or mental attributes and is comprised of both natural talent and learned skill. The average human may score a 10 or 11 on most abilities. However, we are talking about heroes here, and most characters will have 13 to 18 being exceptionally high at the beginning of their campaign. Even higher numbers can be achievable in some cases. The ability modifier is found by subtracting 10 from the ability score and dividing by 2, rounding down. So a 10 or 11 would have a +0 modifier, 12 or 13 +1, 8 or 9 -1, and so on. These are the numbers you add to your dice rolls to determine success when using that ability. The unique and varying modifiers of each character may influence the way that they choose to approach a problem. For instance, this character has a much higher modifier to strength compared to charisma. If they come upon a path guarded by an NPC soldier, they may choose to approach the problem with their sword rather than with diplomacy to boost the odds of success in their dice roll. However, a different character with a different array of modifiers may choose to approach the problem differently.
Sometimes a character might be especially good at a specific area within one of these ability scores. For instance, a character might have naturally high charisma, but persuading somebody to do something and deceiving them into doing it are 2 different uses of the charisma skill, and they would call for 2 different roles at the table. We call those different uses of an ability score skills.
So let's quickly go over all the types of skills on your character sheet. What's that? There's 18 of them? Oh no, I'm gonna need some help. Kids!
And now the Kids Table proudly presents all 18 of the ability score derived skills from D&D with a tomato. Athletics: I can push, lift, and carry things. Acrobatics: I can tumble, jump, and dodge. Sleight of hand: I can steal, lockpick, and pickpocket things. Stealth: I can hide and sneak. Arcana: I know what magic does. History: I know about the past. Investigation: I know how to gather information. Nature: I know about the natural world. Religion: I know about the gods. Animal handling: I understand animal behavior. Insight: I understand when others are telling the truth. Medicine: I understand the body and how to fix it. Perception: I understand the details in my surroundings. Survival: I understand environmental clues. Deception: I can convince others to believe my lies. Intimidation: I can convince others with threats. Performance: I can entertain others. Persuasion: I can convince someone with logic or friendliness.
You'll find all the skills listed alphabetically next to the ability scores on the character sheet. Each skill is listed followed by the abbreviation for the ability score it's related to. For example, acrobatics is related to dexterity. Most of the time, the modifier for the skill is the same as the modifier for the related ability score. So you can see here that acrobatics is +1, same as dexterity. However, you'll also notice that some of the skills here are marked, and their modifiers are higher than their related ability score. We call these proficiencies. In kid language, these are a character's best skills. During character creation, a player will be directed to pick certain skills as their proficiencies. The modifier for a skill a character is proficient in is found by adding the modifier from their ability score to their proficiency bonus. For level 1 characters, that bonus is +2, and it goes up at certain levels when characters level up. So the only reason any of these numbers matter is because they help you, the DM, determine whether a character succeeds or fails during the course of the story. Let's say a player is sneaking through a castle, and they've been found by a guard. They have a number of options here. They might choose to push the guard away and run. They might try to dodge around the guard. They might try to persuade the guard to let them go. They might try to lie to the guard and tell them that they belong there. Each one of those potential actions would use a different skill linked to an ability score. Most times kids won't necessarily know their skills, but they'll know what they want to do, like, I want to lie to the guard. It's up to you, the DM, to listen to what they want to do and then try to match their action to one of the skills available on the list. In this case, that would be a deception check, which is a charisma-based skill. Now comes the hard part, setting the difficulty class. Difficulty class, or DC, is the number that the player has to meet or beat in order to succeed on the check. 10 represents an easy check. For instance, catching a tomato lovingly thrown by your trusted brother at a low speed from 2 feet away. That would be a DC of 10. Still possible to fail, but more than likely to succeed. A DC of 12 might be something that's moderately easy. A DC of 15 might be something that's moderately difficult. And a DC of 20 would be something that's really, really hard. If you're playing from a source book, certain checks will be listed with an appropriate DC. Otherwise, it's the DM's job to make up on the spot what a good DC for the check would be based on the context of the story. In this example, is the guard willing to listen because they've met the player before or because the player looks like they belong? If that's true, this would call for a lower DC. Or is the guard more inclined to distrust the player because they're not really supposed to be there? So the situation then would call for a higher DC, a more difficult check. It's up to you, but decide before your player rolls to keep things fair. Once you've got a DC in mind, then have your player roll a d20 and add the appropriate modifier for their appropriate skill and see what the total roll is. You compare that total roll to the DC that you've set. If the roll that the player made meets or beats that DC, then the player succeeds. Otherwise, the player fails. Either way, the story continues from that point.
Now DMs, once you get comfortable navigating DCs, making skill checks to determine success and failure, you can start to play around with degrees of success. For example, say your player walks into a general store and wants to start negotiating with the NPC shopkeeper for a discount. You set a DC of 14. You don't have to only go with a 14 or higher succeeds and they get the 20% discount they were asking for, or lower than 14 fails and they don't get the discount and pay the regular price. You can determine based on how close they are to the DC how successful they are. For instance, if they roll a 14 or a 15, you could say the shopkeep agrees and gives them the 20% discount. But if they roll much higher, say a 19 or a 20, the shopkeep can give them an even higher discount, say 25%. On the flip side, if they roll a 10 or 11, you can say the shopkeeper says, sorry, my boss says I'm not allowed to give discounts, but there's no further consequences. On the other hand, if they roll a 1, 2, or 3, perhaps something that they said to the shopkeeper offended that shopkeeper and they refused to do business with them. This can really spice up your game and add a lot of antics and laughter.
So what ultimately happens if a player fails an ability check? Bottom line, the story has to continue no matter what. Sometimes the ability checks that a player proposes don't really affect the story in a meaningful way, so if they fail, the story can just continue. But sometimes there are story beats that have to happen in order for the narrative to progress. For instance, they're standing at a locked door and they need that door to open in order to progress through the dungeon. Or they've been chasing a goblin through the forest and so they need to be able to figure out what path the goblin took. Or they need to convince some princess to come with them in order to get on with the story. In each of those cases, players might propose a number of different ability checks to figure out what to do in those situations, and they might fail every single one. But you still have to be able to continue with the story. So, when you as a DM are planning out the different story arcs, the different story beats, make sure that you are planning to fail forward. In other words, when a character fails an ability check, what are you as the DM going to do to continue driving the story forward? For instance, if they fail to open a locked door, they can't use a lockpick, they can't break it down, they can't find another way in, they've failed all of those ability checks. Perhaps a guard might open the door from the other way, and then there's a consequence to failing all of those checks. Or if they're trying to track something through the forest and they fail their investigation check, they fail their nature check, they fail their perception check, maybe they still find their way through the forest, but the thing that they're looking for is in danger because they've taken so long to find it. Whatever happens, the story has to continue, so make sure you are planning for ways that the characters can fail forward in the story.
Now there's one other type of roll you need to know about: saving throws. Saving throws are rolls made when a character is trying to avoid a spell, trap, poison, or some other type of effect. You can find your saving throw modifier in this box here on the character page. Your class will determine which 2 abilities receive a proficiency bonus. When making a saving throw, identify that ability's corresponding saving throw modifier. Roll your d20, add the modifier, and compare it to the DC of the effect to determine whether or not your attempt at avoidance was effective. For instance, if your rogue triggers a trap when trying to open a chest with a DC of 15, perhaps they roll a 14 and they add their dexterity modifier of 1, which equals 15. This meets or beats the DC of 15 and they're able to dodge out of the way of that effect.
Saving throws are a special type of ability check, and should only ever really be used in response to something actively happening in the story.
To learn more about playing D&D with kids, watch the other videos in this series or our actual play campaign with kid players at the table. The kids table, because when kids are at the table, everyone wins. Oi! Who put tomatoes in my fruit salad? Actually not that bad. Kind of savory, sweet thing going on there.